Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our third and final installment of SAPIR's 1 Year Later series. We've had more than 1,000 of you sign up for this conversation, and for good reason. In fact, for two good reasons. Okay, well, here's the first good reason. The subject of today's conversation, an essay written on November 27th, 2023, about, quote, the day after, couldn't be more timely or more relevant. It is now day 382 of the war, a war that's lasted longer, if I'm not mistaken, than any other in Israeli history, a war that Israel is fighting on multiple fronts, in the southwest against Hamas, in the north against Hezbollah, to the east against Iran, to the south against the Houthis, and elsewhere. From the beginning, really from the beginning, the question of what happens after the fighting ends has been top of mind for many people. Now, with the assassination of Yahya Sinwar, the horizon of hope for a, quote, day after seems more achievable. A few days ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu proclaimed that, quote, a day after has arrived in the Middle East. President Biden emphasized that, quote, there is now the opportunity for a day after in Gaza without Hamas in power. But is that the case? We'll get to that momentarily, but the answer to that question brings me to the second good reason that so many have joined for today's conversation. And that is because today's guest and the author of the piece about a day after is that rare scholar statesman who has served in the highest corridors of academic, diplomatic, and political power, including as Prime Minister Netanyahu's ambassador, Israel's ambassador to the United States from 2009 until 2013. Ambassador Michael Oren is many things: a prolific writer, a novelist, a best-selling author of multiple acclaimed histories of Israel and the Middle East, and a former member of Knesset, among many other things. Ambassador Oren, welcome. So glad you're with us.
Good. Thank you for that very warm introduction. Thank you for mentioning my fiction, which
Yeah, people don't know about that.
sells dozens of copies. It's great. Thank you.
Well, after today, hopefully it'll be dozens more.
Right.
So as a reminder, especially for those who are new to SAPIR conversations, we encourage you to ask questions along the way. If anything piques your interest or leads to any righteous indignation or something you hear which you agree with, regardless of what it is, please insert the questions in the Q&A function at the very bottom. Here's what's going to happen. Ambassador Oren and I will speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll aim to get to as many of those questions as possible. Okay? All right, Yalla. Ambassador, we have a ton to get to, very little time. So here's the very first question for you. Mohammed Deif, head of Hamas's military wing. Ismail Haniyeh, head of Hamas's political wing. Fuad Shukr, one of Hezbollah's top commanders. Ibrahim Akil, head of Hezbollah's Radwan forces. Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah. And last week, Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas. All of these terrorist masterminds were taken out by Israeli forces, mostly within the last 3 months. Now, we know that targeted killings are not by any stretch of the imagination a new tactic for Israel. In fact, according to Ronan Bergman, in his book from a few years ago, Israel's assassinated more people than any other country in the Western world. That said, when you wrote your piece last year in November 2023, did you ever imagine the elimination of all these terrorist leaders within a 12-month period? And now, 1 year later, do you think that this decapitation campaign can or will alter the fundamental terms of this conflict?
Great question. Great to be with SAPIR, which I read, of course, religiously. It's wonderful to be with you again. Going back, last November, I like to think of myself as being, somewhat prescient, if not prophetic. I call attention to the fact that on October 5th, I was giving a lecture in the United States, and I told my audience to their chagrin that Israel would soon be going to war because the United States time was trying to forge a peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. As part of that deal, the Saudis were going to get nuclear power. And I said that if anybody thinks the Iranians are going to sit quietly while the Saudis get nuclear power, they're kidding themselves. The Iranians will start a war. And it's interesting, of the documents we've now recovered from Hamas archives in Khan Yunis, said exactly that. That was one of the primary reasons they went to war. It was also because of the divisions within Israeli society, the fear of the return of Donald Trump. Believe it or not, this is controversial. The Iranians don't like Trump. And they were looking at some of the surveys back then. So, it's not really prophecy. It's just connecting a lot of dots. So like a dot saying that Israel, if back in November, I could have predicted that someday Israel would have eliminated the heads of these terrorist groups, I'd probably say yes. And the reason is history. Going back, we have eliminated, Hassan Nasrallah's predecessor. We eliminated Sinwar's predecessors, Haniya's predecessors. We've eliminated them all. That is not a panacea, we learned that these organizations are so constructed that the leaders are, if not readily, but ultimately they can be succeeded by others, and they have no shortage of means of resources. They have full recourses to a fully developed theology. It's not even an ideology, and of course weaponry. So while I think it has a big psychological impact, and not just on Israel, it has a psychological impact on our relations with the world. It has an impact, hopefully, on the Lebanese and on the Palestinians as well. It's not a cure-all, and as we've seen now, fighting has gone on both in Lebanon and in Gaza, in spite of the fact that we have eliminated both Sinwar, Haniya, and Hassan Nasrallah. And actually, we eliminated the two replacements for Hassan Nasrallah, one after the other. So, not the best thing. What will bring about an end to the war? And that is the achievement of the goals that have been set out for the war by the Israeli government. In the south, it means degrading Hamas to the point where it can no longer threaten us, can no longer rule over the Gaza Strip. That doesn't mean Hamas is going to disappear. It's the cliche. You can't defeat an idea. Yes, we're still going to be dealing with Hamas cells in Gaza, and not just in Gaza. Certainly in Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, we'll be dealing with Hamas. Hamas is an idea, like ISIS is an idea, like Al Qaeda is an idea, the Muslim Brotherhood. No, you can't defeat them militarily. You can degrade them. There are a lot of neo Nazis in the world, but they're a lot less threatening to us because there's no Nazi Germany behind them. So we're taking away the equivalent of the Nazi Germany. Even ISIS is less threatening because there's no caliphate, there's no Islamic State. In Lebanon, the goal is different. I don't believe that our goal is to destroy Hezbollah. It is to take Hezbollah down many, many notches and to drive it north of the Litani River, to implement retroactively UN Resolution 1701, as well as UN Resolutions 5559 and 1569 from before 2006, which call for not just for Hezbollah to withdraw north of the Litani River, but to basically render all of southern Lebanon a demilitarized zone. That'd be good. The big question is how we're going to actually enforce that. Are we going to let UNIFIL do it? Kind of doubt that. We're going to let the Lebanese army do it? Doubt that as well. And what role would the Israeli defense forces have in ensuring the implementation of those resolutions? Broadly speaking, nothing's going to change in our region until Iran is made to pay a prohibitive price. Iran, literally about 99% of all the bloodshed, the violence, the upheaval, and warfare in this region stem from Iran. And to this day, Iran has not paid any price, never mind a prohibitive price. No price has been exacted, neither by Israel nor by the United States. I hear the Iranians have, and their proxies have fired at U.S. bases in this region about 200 times. They've closed a very crucial international waterway, the Mandeb Straits, to international shipping. No price whatsoever, zero. And until that changes, the Middle East can't gain stability. I don't care all the talk about creating some type of Middle Eastern NATO. That will be insufficient. Iran has to be deterred, and that would be considered a victory.
So, Ambassador, you answered my next 8 successive questions in that answer, which is great. But I'm going to unpack a few elements of this. To your point that nothing will change until Iran is made to pay a price. How does this shift the calculus of Netanyahu, if at all? That being Sinwar's demise. So Sinwar has been taken out. His predecessor, at least politically speaking, has been taken out. To your point, Ahmad Yassin years ago, his predecessor had been taken out. But Sinwar played a pretty important symbolic role in the minds of Palestinians and in the minds of Israelis. I think there was a deep-seated fear that Sinwar would, come out of the rubble on the day after with a V sign, and that's all he needed to do to demonstrate victory for the Palestinians. But now that he's gone, do you see, putting the Iran question aside for a moment, which we'll get to,
Yeah.
do you see an opening for Netanyahu to secure the release of the 101 hostages and captivities and wind down this phase of the war?
Well, here we tread, and I tread lightly because it's getting into, complex Israeli political questions. There's a conventional wisdom here. It's held by a certain percentage of the Israeli population that Bibi is belonging in this war to, perpetuate his own political career, as long as he's facing excuse me, these charges in corruption and bribery in Israeli courts. He will continue the war. And there's that there was a Hamas deal on the table several months ago, and that undermined that deal by adding conditions like retaining the Philadelphia route. That position held quite fiercely, adamantly by part of the Israeli population. Another part of the population says absolutely not. That Netanyahu is withstanding immense international pressure to pursue Israel's crucial strategic goals, to restore our deterrence power, to uphold our security, and that, frankly, today Hamas is still firing rockets into southern Israel. This war is not over yet. It's not. And in the north. So I can't, I don't represent the prime minister anymore. And I don't know what's going on in his heart. I do not know. My gut tells me that what we can hope for, and I have to couch this as a hope, not even an act of prescience, but a hope, is that the Hamas leadership, such as it remains in Gaza, will fragment, and you could get individual Hamas commanders striking deals for limited ceasefires in limited areas, for the release of some hostages. Hostages are not being held, as far as we know, in one place, and we have to proceed on the assumption that Hamas doesn't even know where all the hostages are. In the case of the past, we know of hostages that were held by families. Gilad Shalit was held by a family, sold to Hamas, by the way, was not taken by Hamas. We
Mm.
don't know. We don't know. Back in November, very shortly after I wrote that article for SAPIR, I gave an interview to the Wall Street Journal. And in that article, I talked about revisiting the 1982 evacuation of the PLO from Beirut. Now, I remember quite well because I was there, and that's how old I am. And what we did was let Arafat and much of the PLO evacuate Beirut under international supervision and go to Tunis. And that enabled us to lift the siege of Beirut at the time. So I said, let's revisit it. Let Hamas leaders get on any ship, let them go where the heck they want. All right, they can go to Libya, they can go to Syria, but they give us the hostages back. And I think, without being able to deduce any, hard and fast evidence, that the majority of Israelis would actually agree to that. So it's really not about vengeance; it's about getting the hostages back, because a very significant percentage of the population believe that if we do not secure the release of the hostages, then something um, irreparable will happen in the DNA of Israel, and Israeli parents will no longer be able to send their kids to the army. I have that people who think that even in my arm in my family, and I think that's much more important than defeating Hamas.
In other words, if imagine the following scenario: all 101 hostages are returned back, and Hamas still maintains some type of infrastructure, but in another country. You think that'll be more palatable to more Israelis than completely and utterly defeating Hamas militarily and maintaining perhaps some type of occupying presence in Gaza, but still having, several hostages, dead or alive, in the hands of Hamas or other terrorist affiliates?
I think there'd be a certain segment of the population would say no, that defeating Hamas is more important than getting the terrorists back. We know that. We know that debate occurs.
Hmm.
Some of the polls show it's basically 50-50. The country is completely divided. And we're divided within ourselves and
Hmm.
within our own families. So it is a extremely painful, excruciating situation. I always say that Hamas hit us between the eyes, not these eyes, but the pronoun eyes. Because,
Hmm.
Israel is a Jewish and democratic state. We always have that dual identity, but we have a dual defense identity. The country was
Hmm.
created in 1948 to ensure that the Holocaust that occurred 3 years before that never happened again. That the country would defend the land and the people of Israel. That's one eye. The other eye says, if in the course of defending the land and people of Israel, we fall captive, then the country will do everything in its power to redeem us, to secure our release. And so Hamas hit us between those two eyes. And we've been trying to reconcile those two identities ever since. And
Hmm.
it's exquisitely painful.
I want to move to something you wrote about in your essay, which you said the day after would be predicated on demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. And you wrote, no more rockets, rocket factories, or underground arsenals. All the weaponry in the hands of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad must be confiscated and destroyed. The entire tunnel system, all 300 miles of it, must be sealed, cracked, and buried. Gaza must never again serve as a launching pad for any projectile of any caliber at the people of Israel. Um, Obviously, we all wish for that day. What would be required of Israel to accomplish this ambitious set of objectives? And I'm curious, what would be required of other Arab states, either Egypt or Gulf states, to accomplish that series of objectives?
But when we say I would sign on that, what I wrote today, with one minor correction, it's not 300 miles, it's probably closer to 500 miles
Mm.
tunnels. We keep on underestimating the extent of this system. This truly,
Hmm.
hellish system. Um, what is required would be time and resources. I put this in the most, in the most pedestrian terms, is that we need a tremendous amount of explosives to do this. I mean, think about how much explosive you need to blow up the New York subway system and collapse it. And keep in mind, there's also a tunnel system in Lebanon we're discovering, and it's more formidable because the tunnels in Gaza are dug in sand, while those in Lebanon are forged in rock. They're scooped
Hmm.
out. You need a tremendous amount of explosives. The hope would be that the demilitarization would be conducted in the long run in conjunction with an international force, and that international force would have a large inter-Arab component in it, and that we would cooperate with engineers from around the world in demilitarization. By the way, the notion of demilitarizing Gaza is not the first time it's come up. It
Hmm.
was one of the proposals made in virtually almost every round of major fighting we had with Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. We talked about demilitarization and how demilitarization could be affected. One of the examples we gave was the way that much of Bashar al-Assad's chemical weapons were removed from Syria by the Russians. So there are precedents, not perfect precedents by any means. Bashar al-Assad still has chemical weapons, but not as many as he used to have. So there are model history for demilitarization. The question is, we need time and we need resources.
Do you see a protracted insurgency emerging? Well, you talked about a fragmented Hamas as as one possible option. So how does the Israeli government effectively stabilize this post-conflict society and prevent an insurgency? I mean, in the piece itself, you wrote that Gaza must be internationalized. It must no longer be an Israeli problem or even an Israeli-Egyptian problem. If you're in the UAE, right, or if you're one of the Abraham Accord states, what would convince you to become more involved in preventing protracted insurgency from emerging and beginning the process of redeveloping a strip of land that's completely decimated?
Okay, well, I think that the one of the major keys is the question of the pathway to a Palestinian state. So when the
Hmm.
Saudis and the Emiratis talk about Palestinian statehood, they always use the P word. They use pathway.
Hmm.
And I've long been an advocate of saying, okay, let's talk about a pathway. Talking about a pathway doesn't obligate us in any way. A pathway is a thing with gravel. A pathway is a thing with flowers. We can discuss a pathway. The leaders of these countries, though they're not democratically elected, they do have a public opinion, and they can't afford to ignore that public opinion. And so we can help them to help us by engaging that in that question. Our problem is political. It's the composition of the current Israeli government. We have significant members of that government, like Mr. Smotrich and Mr. Ben-Gvir, who will oppose that, even discussing a pathway. And more to the point, just yesterday, there was a very significant event that occurred in Israel. It was noted in parts of the American press, but here's a moment of prophecy. It was a convention of people who belong to the parties associated with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir calling for the rebuilding of the 21 settlements, uh, Israeli settlements that were uprooted from Gaza in 2005. And mark my words, Chanan, this is going to be a very significant movement in Israeli politics. Mark my
You were
words.
involved in the you were involved in the Heat Kut, if I'm not mistaken, right? As a
Was
reservist, right?
yes.
Uh, do you think that there's developing or strengthening political support within Israel to actually reconstitute settlements in the Gaza Strip, Jewish Israeli settlements in the Gaza
I would
Strip?
say that I participated in that. Prior to this war, it was the largest Israeli military operation since the Yom Kippur War. About 55,000 soldiers took part in that. And for me personally, it was more traumatic than any other war I participated in. Very traumatic. And I thought it was done in many ways, regrettably. I can't give you actual numbers. I haven't seen polls yet, but I will assume that there's a significant number of Israelis, maybe not a majority, but some number of Israelis who believe that the disengagement was a strategic, historic success, this mistake, and that has cost us, that there's a certain connection between that disengagement and October 7th of 2023. And that perhaps if the 8,000 Israelis whom we ripped out of their homes were still in Gaza, maybe October 7th wouldn't have happened, would have happened in those in that way. Um, it is going to be a significant movement in Israeli politics. Of that, I'm pretty certain.
When you just out of curiosity, when you said that you participated in it regrettably, do you mean that you wish you had not participated in it, or do you regret that that was the decision by then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon to withdraw from Jewish settlements from the Gaza Strip?
I regret that the way it was done and the extent to which it was done.
And that it was it, and you view it as a strategic mistake, perhaps?
Yes, we didn't have to remove all of them, and we certainly didn't have to remove them the way we did.
Um, okay, I'm going to move forward to something else. Mindful, we're almost at 11:20, at least our time, 12:27. If people have questions, please do submit them. I see a number of them coming through. I want to move away from Gaza for a second, and up north, a place that you have a tremendous amount of experience with, in Lebanon, as a soldier, and as a diplomat, and as a historian. I think at the time of the writing, I don't think there were 60,000 internally displaced Israelis forced to
There
flee
were,
the northern border, right? How many?
there were, there were at 60,000. Now
It
it's
was,
closer to
it was
100,000.
so at the time in November, 60,000, upwards of 100,000 now. Last month, Israel expanded its war goals to include the return of those Israelis to their homes in the north. Um, you've alluded to this earlier, where you said we did not there was not a requirement to completely disband Hezbollah the same way there is in Hamas and Gaza Strip. But what would you say your vision is for the quote unquote day after on the northern front? And as you're thinking through that, I'm just curious if you think, and again, you alluded to this earlier, whether there is a realistic way to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which for those in the audience who are not aware, it called after the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah for the withdrawal of Hezbollah from the south, called for the withdrawal of Hezbollah south of the Litani River in Lebanon, and for the disarmament and the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Lebanon. What are your
Gotcha.
thoughts?
Okay. Yeah. So these thoughts, hard baked. As a veteran of two, not one but two Lebanon wars, having served a long time in Lebanon itself, and most recently last summer serving on the northern border in the army, and uh, and clearly a goal has to be the return of Israelis to their homes. 100,000 Jews, 60,000 were immediately evacuated. Israel evacuated all the communities within a line of 3.5 miles from the northern border. The reason they did this was twofold. One was to prevent an occurrence in the north of what happened in the south. The Redwan forces, like the Nukba forces of Hamas, like the Red forces of Hezbollah, could have broken through the fence or come through tunnels that we hadn't discovered and massacred entire cities. And Redwan force was much bigger and much better trained. They had been assiduously massacring Syrians for the previous decade. Very skilled at death and murder. That was one reason. The other reason that people remembered in 2006, when we didn't evacuate these communities, thousands and thousands of Israelis ran away from these homes and congregated on the beaches without shelter and food. So we didn't want to, we didn't want to revisit that nightmare. So they evacuated 60,000, but over the course of the next months, where Hezbollah rockets didn't stop at 3.5 miles. They kept going. And it was a war of attrition. It was a creeping war of attrition. It kept on going further south and further west toward Haifa, toward major cities. And so more and more people were fleeing that region. Came up to about 100,000. Those people would not go back to their houses were the status quo ante that existed on October 6th be revived. Because on October 6th, Hezbollah was deployed right along the northern border. If you were in Metula, you could stick your hand through the fence. I don't recommend anybody does this, but you can stick your hand through the fence and you can touch Hezbollah. Well, no one's going to go back now. Now, knowing what terrorists can do to you if they're on the other side of the fence, do to you and your family, no one's going to go back to that. So there has to be a fundamental change in the status quo. And the fundamental change is 1701. That's just the beginning of it. 1701, as you mentioned, Quran calls for Hezbollah to withdraw north of Litani River. And Litani meanders through southern Lebanon at a distance between 10 and 20 kilometers from our northern border. Okay, that's fine. But then who then can implement the demilitarization of South Lebanon? It can't be UNIFIL, because UNIFIL has proven itself to be an abject failure in every possible way. And there's actually reports now that UNIFIL soldiers have been paid off by Hezbollah. Hezbollah dug tunnels right under their positions. Totally useless. The Lebanese army, not really much better. Not really much better. And for a long time, Israel, we had a difference of opinion with the United States. The United States would say there was a country called Lebanon. We used to say there's a country called Hezbollah. And the United States would say, well, there's a Lebanese army. We would say there's Hezbollah. Okay, so it's like, the fox guarding the hen house. Who's going to guard Hezbollah? Clearly, there has to be a change also in 1701. And that change has to afford Israel the ability to monitor what goes on in that demilitarized zone and to intervene militarily if we have to.
Does that mean a massive ground invasion and reoccupation of southern Lebanon?
We hope not. We hope not. My hope is this is my hope, and that is that Iran, having lost one of its crucial proxies already, Hamas, will do everything in its power to preserve Hezbollah, which is its main proxy. It's an actual wing of the IRGC. And if 1701 is the price that Iran has to pay to preserve Hezbollah, they'll do it because you'll live another day. And let's see what happens in another 10 years. That's what they need. What they need is the connection between Tehran and the Mediterranean. And that's what Hezbollah gives them, right? And it also gives them strategic deaths, many things. They're going to pay a price for it. And I also think that Lebanon as a country, and I don't mean to disparage any Lebanese, but the way Lebanon is politically constituted today, it is basically a collection of crime families that are deeply involved in money laundering and every type of traffic you can imagine, especially drugs. There has been a confluence of interest between certain Druze groups and certain Christian groups in Hezbollah. I think that once that they sense that Hezbollah has been weakened, they may turn on Hezbollah. And that's a hope I'll have. And that Hezbollah may survive. It probably will survive, but will survive in a much, much weakened position.
I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll head to questions from the audience. You talked briefly, Ambassador, about the importance of Iran paying a price and the dependence that Hezbollah has on Iran. And it was interesting to me that right after a rather lackluster start to state the obvious, Israeli dominance on the battlefield has been undeniable, right? Its intelligence
Don't
apparatus.
tell that to the New York Times. They keep on casting aspersions on our military capabilities. They know nothing. But okay, what Israel has accomplished in Gaza and in Lebanon will be studied in West Point and other military academies around the world for generations.
Yeah, I mean, listen, how many, I don't know, of the 24 Hamas battalions that have been decimated, how many are still standing?
Yeah.
But the reality is the intelligence apparatus, which seemingly was caught flat-footed last year, has regained its luster with a number of impressive operations, not just in Gaza, but in Lebanon and Yemen and Iran. So I'm curious, after Iran's ballistic missile attack on Israel, I think it was October 1st, the Israeli government has vowed retaliation, in part to maintain escalation dominance. Oil rigs, nuclear facilities apparently are off the table. What do you think will happen? And as a correlator, because we don't have too much time, I heard Ryan Crocker, who's the former ambassador to Lebanon, Kuwait, Syria, Pakistan, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He expressed a concern that actually the more vulnerable the Iranians look on non-nuclear options, on the conventional means, or the provision of support for Hamas or Hezbollah, the greater the impetus would be for Tehran to strengthen their nuclear capability. So I'm curious how that fits into the Israeli calculation, if at all. And then we'll go to questions from the audience.
And that's true. I think we have to brace ourselves for the possibility of an Iranian breakout. By the way, I think if Donald Trump wins on November 5th, the period between November 5th and January, when he's sworn in, will be a very, very tricky one for us because the Iranians may conclude that this is their last opportunity to break out and create a nuclear weapon. They won't be able to do this on Trump's watch. And that's a widely held view among security people here. Um, yes, I don't think anything's off the table. I know what Washington reporters keep on printing in their papers, but I don't think anything's off the table, and nor everything should be off the table. My hope is that we will deliver something close to a knockout blow to Iran, but it would be sort of the penultimate knockout blow. We have to preserve our final blow to be even more. The Iranians have to know that what they were just hit with is not the end of what we can do, that we can do more, and that will help restore deterrence. I think that blow has to be aimed in such a way as to weaken this regime, which is already tottering. I don't know if it's going to fall, but we can certainly help push it a bit.
Okay. A ton of questions have come in. Some people listed their names, some did not. I'm going to start with an anonymous question. Okay, ready, Ambassador?
Yep.
A bunch of achievements were listed at the opening, most notably the targeted assassinations that many Western leaders heralded as an advance for humanity. And yet, if Israel had accepted Western advice in recent months, most of these assassinations would not have occurred. What would you tell Jewish Americans who are still planning to vote for the Democrats in 2 weeks, despite the fact that Democratic policy would have precluded these important changes to the status quo? And maybe I can offer a rebuttal to your question afterwards.
Now, I'm not going to get involved in a partisan debate here at all, believe me. But I will say this, at the end of the day, we are an independent country, and we're an independent and sovereign Jewish country in the world's toughest neighborhood. And we have to appreciate everything that the United States does for us, whether it's in financial aid or diplomatic support, the UN, other international institutions. We should appreciate it. At the end of the day, there cannot be a total confluence of our interests. And right now, the administration's interests are very clear. That is avoiding American entanglement in a regional war, certainly avoiding it before November 5th. And every day, basically, the United States doesn't miss an opportunity. American leaders miss an opportunity to broadcast fear about that entanglement. We can't afford to broadcast fear. We are already in a regional entanglement. We're fighting a war on multiple fronts, literally for our survival. People always ask me, what war in Israel's past does this one most closely resemble? You can say Yom Kippur with the surprise attack. You could say 67, we were surrounded by Egypt and its proxies, and the way now we're surrounded by Iran and its proxies. This is really our war of independence. This is being fought in our communities. It's being fought for a large measure among our civilian population, and it's a war for our survival. And so at the end of the day, we have to go with what our interests, if our interests are in moving our army into Rafah, if our interests are moving our army into southern Lebanon and bombing Beirut, if our interests are to deliver something close to that knockout blow to Iran, we have to go with it. In Israel, we distinguish between wars of choice and no choice. Like to mention my own military past, I had the misfortune of fighting in wars that were widely viewed as wars of choice. This is a war, certainly in the north, which is viewed by almost all Israelis as a war of no choice, and viewed as an existential fight. We lose the north, we lose the country, and the country's not that big. And there are other threats. Many people believe we don't get the hostages back, it's going to be a mortal blow to this country. Or if we don't defeat Hamas, it's a mortal blow to this country. We are fighting different types of existential wars on different fronts. At the end of the day, we have to do what we have to do in order to survive.
We received a number of questions about the purported leak of documents from the Pentagon. So I'm just going to select one of the questions. And I have no information or knowledge or anything about this. So let's say, given the leak of Israel's planned military operations against Iran and the stated opposition of the Biden administration to hitting nuclear and energy sites, what are the chances that the Israeli government and the IDF will take bold actions to defeat Iran? And this question was posed by Edward Lipson.
Okay. Well, I think that Israel is going to do again what Israel has to do with Iran. I hope we do it. I've been concerned. With each passing day, our casus belli gets a little weaker. And certainly in the memories of Americans. You've had hurricanes in the South. You've had so many different incidents. You have this presidential election, which takes up all the press oxygen. People made it. If we were to strike tonight, People not even remember why we're striking. But maybe that's not the paramount consideration. Making sure that the operation, when it is implemented, is the best we can do. Is the best we can do, and maybe catch the Iranians, not just the Americans, off guard. Um, I hope that I'm sorry. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it it, it does. Let me see. I was just thinking about it, something you mentioned before. April 13th, right? I think that was the date that Iran launched the bevy of rockets and drones at Israel. That seemed like a pivotal moment in Israel's security paradigm because it was the first time that foreign militaries deployed their own assets and people to defend Israel. I'm thinking about the Brits who deployed fighter jets over Iraq and Syria, the
Yeah.
Jordanians, perhaps for their own reasons, dispatched an air force. We in the United States, we repositioned two destroyers. We
Right.
sent two U.S. fighter squadrons to take
Got it.
out dozens of drones, et cetera. We used the Patriot battery in Erbil. Has this shifted the Israeli security doctrine of, sort of by ourselves? We can and must, we can only depend on ourselves.
No, there's no precedent here. Again, 1991, I was serving in the reserve duty, and I was part of the unit that brought in the Patriot missiles, and they deployed right here in Tel Aviv. And that was given to us for a very similar reason, by the way. The United States didn't want Israel being brought into the coalition against Saddam Hussein, and with the fear that our participation would break up that coalition, particularly the Arab components. And we were hit by 39 Scud missiles from Iraq, right, in Tel Aviv. So there's the precedent. It's happened. And in less well-known cases, Israel has had recourse to rely on American military assets, on certainly on the level of intelligence all the time. Maybe not on the operational, but America's defense relationship, our strategic alliance with the United States, is probably the deepest and most multifaceted strategic alliance which the United States has had with any foreign country in the post-World War II period. And that includes weapons development, cyber cooperation, but also actual cooperation between forces. The SEAL Team 6 that took out Osama bin Laden trained here before embarking on that operation. And the United States was involved um, intimately and intricately in the search for Sinwar and in the search for the hostages. And without going into many details, American special forces were positioned here too during this war.
And is this the first time we just announced the provision of the THAAD system and the deployment of 100 or so U.S. military personnel, I guess in part to help facilitate its use, but that seems like a relatively new phenomenon, perhaps.
Again, it's not. It has precedent. It has precedent. And
Okay,
there's
good
been
point.
American forces for a long time on Israeli soil operating very advanced radars.
Okay.
So it's not a precedent. I hate to disappoint you, it's not a precedent. What it is part of what I think is, and this is speculation on my part, a type of how should I say this? A type of haggling between the United States and Israel right now, where the United States is saying, "Listen, we really don't want you to strike those nuclear oil facilities. We don't need to get dragged into a regional war. We don't just have to see a spike in oil prices before November 5th. What do you want? What can we give you that's going to make this better?" And
Hmm.
I've been in negotiations like this. It's not the first time.
Hmm.
And in an article I published in the Hebrew press, I guess about a week and a half ago, I suggested several things we could request from the United States. One of them, interestingly, was strategic bombers. Israel does not have strategic bombers. We have these wonderful little airplanes called F-35s and F-15s and F-16s, which have limited ranges and limited payloads. But the United
Hmm.
States has B-1s, B-2s that can fly between 30 and 50,000 feet. It's higher than anything the Iranians can touch, and drop a 30,000 bunker buster bomb, strategic penetrator bomb. And I personally have been involved in efforts to try to get the United States to sell these things to us. They have not been willing, but this
What's
would be
been
an
the
opportunity.
reticence?
Hmm?
What's been the reticence?
Because what do you think the reticence is? I'll ask you. We're not going to use the damn things. But I think at this point, that type of arrangement would send an unequivocal message to the Iranians that maybe we won't bomb you this time in this way, but we
Hmm.
have the ability next time to do it in a much more devastating way.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ambassador. Michael
Right.
Bros, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, said recent reports are that Saudi Arabia has been meeting with Iran. Is there a path back to the Abraham Accords with the Saudis, Or is there a real fear of rapprochement between the Saudis and Iran?
It's not the first time. There's been a rapprochement already between Saudi and the Iranians that were mediated by the Chinese, which was, added another wrench into the works, the Chinese being involved. So it's not the first time. I think, from their interests, perspective of their interests in the Gulf, they don't know where this is heading entirely. The quickest way, the best way to ensure that Saudi Arabia remains in the Western camp, that Saudi Arabia and other Sunni Gulf states make peace with Israel, maintain that peace, is by assuring Israel's military victory against Hamas and Hezbollah. These are countries, whose leaders, they don't necessarily love us. They don't get up in the morning and sing Hatikva. All right, they made peace with us because we're strong. Because at a time when America was withdrawing from the Middle East, we were the only country that was standing up to their twin existential threats, which was Sunni extremism in the form of Hamas, ISIS, the Muslim Brotherhood, Al Qaeda, and Shiite extremism in the form of Hezbollah and Iran. We're the only country standing up to both of them. And if we prevail against both, then we'll get peace. And I always make my apologies to John Lennon for paraphrasing him, and that is, we have to give war a chance. If you want peace, give war a chance.
You've spent many years on college campuses, so I want to take you to sort of a very different type of war here in the United States, very different type of battle. But wondering asks Ben Lubin if you could spend a few minutes talking about what's happening on U.S. college campuses with regard to actively cheering for the terrorists and how we might be able to root out the outside forces influencing the students' perspectives and shift the dialogue. Your thoughts?
Okay, great. I've spent too many years on American campuses. I don't know if I'd ever be able to go back now, given the atmosphere on those campuses. It's been some years now. Um, and I would just recommend, I don't want to take away any readership from SAPIR, but I have a Substack called Clarity, which you can get. And I've written extensively about the situation on American campuses there. And certainly comparing my experiences both as a student and a professor to what's occurring on these campuses now. It's called Clarity. And I would say this, that there are a number of ways that we can defend Jewish students, that we can create better atmosphere and secure atmosphere for them on American campuses. And let's put this in perspective. This is happening on about 60 campuses in the United States. There are about 7,000 campuses in the United States. And the vast majority of American students, when they're polled, will say that not only do we not identify with these protesters, we think they should be punished. So we're talking about a minority of campuses, a minority of students. Unfortunately, the campuses happen to be among the leading institutions in American academia, and the protesters have I would say, a disproportional gravitational pull on policy and certainly on media. And they do make Jewish students on the campus very uncomfortable and feeling and threatened. So one way you act is certainly by dealing with administrations and ensuring that they actually apply and enforce the regulations which exist on these campuses. And I know this was the principal problem at Columbia. There wasn't as if there weren't regulations in place that could have prevented much of this upheaval, but the administration shied away from actually implementing it. But having said that, there are now a number of American initiatives, American Jewish initiatives to pressure administrations to even threaten to oust administrators the way they were in the past. At the end of the day, the problem is not with administrations, the problem is with the faculty. And that is a deeply seated endemic problem that goes back to the 1960s. And altering that will be extremely difficult. It will take generations. And what you can do in the meanwhile is you can do much as Georgetown did. You mentioned earlier you were at Georgetown. What they did at Georgetown was simply end run the Middle East Department. The Middle East Department at Georgetown was toxic. They were giving credit for students to go out and protest. So what the Georgetown did was to create a Department of Jewish Civilizations with a visiting professorship for an Israeli to give a fair presentation of Israel on campus. And you also mentioned attending my lectures, the public lectures at Georgetown in 2009. You can bring in lecturers. I had an agreement with Princeton University to bring in a series of lectures that would, give a fair presentation of Israel. And the university and the Center for Jewish Life there didn't honor that agreement, unfortunately. But it doesn't mean you can't revisit it. There are ways where right now we can do this. Probably the best solution right now, if you are a senior in college at senior high school and you're looking at colleges, look at those campuses that are Jewish friendly, that are Israel friendly. Um, Campuses like the University of Miami, campuses like the University of Texas, Barry's new school in Austin. There are schools. University of Kansas, an excellent school. Um, we don't necessarily have to feed the Ivy League mania.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a robust discussion and debate on precisely that particular topic
Yeah.
amongst leaders within various communities. I'm mindful of your time, Ambassador. I'm going to ask you one or two more, and then we'll wrap because I know you have a hard stop. Anonymous asks, we're going to go back to Israel for a second. Israeli leaders
Anonymous.
will say that a two-state solution after October 7th is insanity, and I can see that. Israeli leaders will say that to pull out of the West Bank now would be national suicide, and I empathize. Israeli leaders say they need a muscular response to terrorism, and I recognize that. Israeli leaders will say that Washington doesn't know what it means to live in a tough neighborhood, and I agree with them. But why does each successive Israeli government, right and center, continue to expand settlements and refuse to rein in settler violence? What is the security justification for not doing
There's not
so?
much. Listen, we have this, not all settlements are the same. I've been involved in the peace process for, oh boy, over 30 years. I was an advisor to Yitzhak Rabin. I participated in the last round of discussions, negotiations with the Palestinians. I've been involved with drafting various peace plans. Um, 85% of the settlements are within the bloc that will always be part of Israel. Even in Barack Obama's thinking about the possible two-state solution, that bloc was going to be part of Israel, and we were going to compensate the Palestinians with swaps elsewhere. It's a principle that was adopted also for the Trump peace plan, and so there are excuse me outlying settlements, and there's settler violence. There's no excuse for settler violence. There's no excuse for that to go on at all. It's a danger not just to Palestinians, a danger to Israel's security, Israel's foreign relations, to Israel's sovereignty. It's a violation of our sovereignty. It has to end. It has to be, it has to be certainly clamped down to the greatest degree possible. I'm not going to defend it remotely in any way. But having said that, settlements, certainly settlements within the bloc, are in the land of Israel, and it is our raison d'être. You know, this country exists because the land of Israel belongs to the people of Israel, and that includes the entire land of Israel. I can't be sitting here in Jaffa and say I have a right to be here, but someone living in Bethel or Shiloh doesn't have a right to be there. It doesn't work that way. What we can say is that the right, as all rights, doesn't necessarily have to be fully implemented under all conditions. We're not going to build settlements in downtown Ramallah or down Jenin or Tulkarm. And we should always keep the door open to the possibility of some type of diplomatic resolution, and certainly provide the Palestinians what they call a diplomatic horizon, even though right now, and Anonymous is right, the vast majority of Israelis think it's insane. I'm sitting in a room, my office here, and if I look to my left, I see the Mediterranean Sea. If I look to my right on a clear day, I see the Hebron Hills from Tel Aviv. Now, you create a Palestinian state that is within 48 hours going to become a Hamas state. I'm not going to get rockets here as I got this morning. I'm going to get bullets through this window. I'll be in bullet range, and Israelis understand that. They just do. So we're not there yet. My greatest complaint, and here another plug. I have a manifesto out called Israel 2048. It's a book that appears in Arabic, Hebrew, and in English. And I've talked about it at the Maimonides Fund before. I've given a talk about 2048. It's a project I began in the Knesset that looks at what Israel should, the kind of Israel we need on our 100th birthday, which is 2048, and in order to assure another century of success and prosperity and security. And the largest chapter in there is about the peace process. And my overall conclusion is that by fixating on a two-state solution, close to zero chance of success, not the least of which because neither the Palestinians nor the Israelis want it. We block off the path to other possible diplomatic venues, like federal solutions, or in the Swiss model, the cantonment solutions. And so by constantly fixating on the two-state solution, we're not getting anywhere. And the great victims of that, the people who suffer the most from that, are the Palestinians.
Ambassador, I'm mindful of your time, and I deeply appreciate the last 55 minutes you've given to us here at SAPIR and to the broader SAPIR audience. And thank you for your prescient essay from last year. And here's to hoping that we come closer and closer to that day after for all people in the region. So deeply, deeply appreciate you being with us, Ambassador. Thank
Oh
you.
man, thank you to SAPIR. Again, read it. I look forward to you actually managed to weather the Israeli mails and get me a copy, a hard copy of SAPIR when it comes out. So I'm very appreciative of that. That takes
And
fortitude, persistence.
that's a
And
real
I
operational
wish you
success.
all, Mo'adim L'Simcha, Chag Sameach. May we have a peaceful, certainly more peaceful. It's a low bar, a more peaceful, joyous, secure year.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Be
you. Right.
well.
Right.
Bye.